You've been working hard and saving for retirement. So what happens to your retirement now that you're getting divorced? Hi, I'm Ruthenberg-Marshall, attorney and founder of Porchlight. Today, I'm going to be answering the question of what happens to a 401k in a divorce. First, you should know that most typically, 401ks and other retirement accounts are marital property. This comes as a surprise to many of my clients because their retirement account is solely in their name and often connected with their job. But if it was earned during the marriage, it's marital property, and that means it's subject to division during the divorce. Now, maybe you have a retirement account from a previous job that was earned entirely before the marriage. That would be your premarital separate property, and it wouldn't be subject to division in the divorce. More commonly, people have a retirement account that was partially earned before the marriage and partially earned after the marriage. In that case, you have a commingled asset, and part of it is your separate property that is not subject to division in the divorce, but the part that was earned after the marriage is marital property and is still subject to division. When courts divide property in a Georgia divorce, including retirement accounts, they use a system called equitable distribution. This just means what's fair and not necessarily what's equal. But in reality, the result is pretty close to a 50-50 division of the total marital assets. That doesn't mean that every asset is split exactly down the middle and half given to one spouse and half the other, but the court puts all the marital assets in a pot and divides it pretty close to even unless there's some extremely compelling financial reason not to. Usually the fact that your spouse acted terribly in some way and you hate them and are now divorcing them is not a compelling reason in the court's eyes to deviate far from the 50-50 division. That being said, you and your spouse can reach any kind of agreement that you want on the division of your assets. You do not have to leave this decision up to a judge. So if you and your spouse are looking to reach an agreement on how you can divide your assets, there are a couple ways that you can handle the retirement account. One way would be to balance out the assets in the retirement account with another asset from the marital estate. So say there's a similar balance in your retirement as there is in a similar amount of equity in the marital home. Maybe your spouse really wants to keep the marital home. It might make sense for your spouse to keep the marital home and all of the equity in it, and you to keep your retirement account and all of the funds in that. These assets don't have to be necessarily dollar for dollar matching, and there may be other assets in the marital pool that can be divided and used to offset things. So maybe you have a money market account that has probably a smaller amount of funds in it than your retirement account or the equity in your home. That could be used to balance it out. If the equity in the home is slightly more, then you might get more funds from the money market to balance out the fact that the retirement account is slightly less than the equity in the marital home. Another option is to divide the 401k with a QDRO. This can be done if you're dividing the 401k equally 50-50, or if you're dividing it in proportions. So again, we go back to the previous scenario where someone may get more of one asset than another asset. If you're dividing the 401k, it doesn't have to be exactly equal. One person could get 60%, the other could get 40%, one person could get a set amount of funds out of it. There are a lot of options that you could use. When you divide it with a QDRO, which is a qualified domestic relations order, that's a court order that tells the administrator of the plan that they can divide the account and give some of the funds in it to your spouse. Typically, most divorce attorneys do not prepare QDROs, so you'll need to hire specialized QDRO counsel, but your divorce attorney can give you a referral for the QDRO counsel. One of the benefits of a QDRO is that the receiving spouse can take a penalty-free cash withdrawal. So this can be very helpful if that spouse needs a lump sum of funds to get started on their new post-divorce life. They will still have to pay taxes on those funds. They just won't have to pay any early withdrawal penalties. You should also note that not all retirement accounts require a QDRO to be divided. So for example, IRAs do not require a QDRO. So you may be dividing an IRA as part of the marital assets, and you wouldn't need to go through the QDRO process for that. You would just transfer it to your spouse. When are situations where you have a 401k and you might not want to use a QDRO? Well, as we discussed earlier, if you're offsetting some of the marital assets with other marital assets so that everyone's walking away with a similar amount, but not a similar amount of each asset, then you wouldn't need a QDRO. Generally, when we're looking at financial solutions, we want everyone to be okay planning for that financial future, which includes retirement. But some people might feel that the house is a more important investment vehicle versus a retirement account, or that it's more important to them at this moment and they still have time to adequately plan for retirement. So in that case, you would not use a QDRO, you'd just divide up the assets as necessary without actually dividing the account. Another time you might not want to use a QDRO is if both parties have retirement accounts and there's only a small difference between the parties' retirement accounts. Because a QDRO does cost money, if you're only balancing out a small amount, it might not make the most sense to go through the cost and effort of a QDRO to do that. There may be funds elsewhere in the marital estate that you can pull to offset the balance for the spouse who has the lower retirement account balance instead of getting a QDRO. Another example of where you might not want to get a QDRO is if there are not many retirement accounts in the marital estate at all. So if one party just has a small retirement account, once you start divvying up those assets and you subtract the cost of a QDRO, that's a smaller amount per person. And it might not make sense if you're talking about just a small retirement account that someone who's recently started and not contributed much to. Dividing assets in the marital estate can be complicated. Porchlight can help you and your spouse figure out a solution that leaves you both in good financial positions going forward. If you need help figuring out a division of assets in your divorce, give us a call.